Hello friends, today on the occasion of Ambedkar's birth anniversary, let us go through his life, his work, his analysis of Indian society, the idea of Indian nationalism, his economic thought and his contribution to Indian constitutional morality and the restructuring of Indian society on the grounds of social justice. So today we go through these aspects of his life and work on the occasion of Ambedkar's birth anniversary. So first of all, let us first understand the historical context in which the rise of Ambedkar happened. So historical context, historical background. So at the time of Ambedkar's birth, so Indian national movement or the idea of Indian nationalism was still in its very birth. So Indian National Congress had taken shape in the year 1885, but the idea of Indian nation or Indian nationalism was very narrow in its aspects. So Indian nationalism in the first phase of its existence before 1917 just confined to demand for certain political reforms like increasing the number of seats in the legislature for Indians or conducting ICS examinations in India also, or certain economic demands like reducing the land revenue or reforming the Jamindari system or abolishing the salt tax. Only such kind of limited, impactful demands were made by the early Indian national leaders from the greats like Surendranath Banerjee to Gopal Krishna Gokhale. So their idea of Indian nationalism was simply political in its manifestation. So they wanted Indian people to be united under the banner of Indian nation in order to fight against the British. So they certain kind of glossed over the complexities or the underneath oppression, violence that was perpetuated against the underprivileged, marginalized or women, Dalits in Indian society. So when the early Indian national leaders wanted to form, to shape an Indian nation, so it was just a top dressing down. They just wanted to gloss over the complexities or the hidden oppression or the underneath marginalization perpetuated on Indians by Indians. So they only focused on the oppression, the exploitation, violence practiced by the British over Indians. Okay, but over the Indian nation, but they completely forgot or ignored or sidelined the oppression perpetuated by Indians on Indians, okay, in terms of caste or in terms of patriarchy. So that was the situation at the time of Ambedkar's birth. Still, Indian national movement was in its nascent phase and its early phase. Indian National Congress was just born, and the idea of Indian nationalism was in its very narrowest sense prevailing at that time. So there was opposition to the moderate Indian nationalism that was preached by the likes of Surendranath Banerjee, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Firoz Shah Mehta, M.G. Ranade. So they only highlighted the oppression, exploitation, discrimination, marginalization perpetrated by the British against the Indian nation in its abstract sense. Indian nation in its abstract sense. So opposing their political ideology were the extremists. They were mainly concerned about the cultural aspects of Indian nationalism, whereas the moderates focused on the economic aspects of Indian nationalism. India should be a nation in order to fight against British economic exploitation, which made India thoroughly poor. Okay, which put India in a worst condition in centuries. But extremist Indian national leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak or Aurobindo or Bipin Chandrapal, these towering personalities only believed, they only focused on the cultural aspects of Indian nationalism. So the majority cultural group in India, which they termed the Hindu culture or the Hindu cultural group, must resist the authority of the British. India should be made independent in order to protect, in order to save the cultural moorings of the majority Hindu population. So that was the aim, the essential focus of the extremist leaders like Tilak, Aurobindo or Bipin Chandrapal, etc. So in the overall Hindu cultural aspects, they also glossed over, they also neglected, they also ignored or forgot to understand under this banner of monolithic Hindu culture, monolithic Hindu community, only the Brahminical or the upper caste sections were their cultural aspects were revived, or their cultural aspects were highlighted or considered more important. Then what about the subaltern classes? Then what about the 50% of Indian population, women? Then what about the 85% of the overall Indian population who were considered to be Shudras and Dalits? Then what about the subaltern? Then what about the Shudras? Then what about the Dalits? Then what about the women? So who were marginalized, who were oppressed, or who were discriminated against by this overall Hindu cultural idiom? So that's the issue with the extremist national leaders. So Indian nationalism was only confined to a battle between the moderate idea of Indian nationalism and the extremist idea of Indian nationalism. Economic nationalism versus cultural aspects of Indian nationalism. But in this particular context, Ambedkar emerged, who had taken up the thus far neglected issue of social justice. So he firmly believed that Indian nationalism must be based on the idea of social justice. Social justice is the essence of any nation worth having. So a nation without social justice is a body without a soul. So he started to highlight the importance of the social justice. What is the meaning of social justice for Ambedkar? His greatest contribution to Indian idea of Indian nationalism was this idea of social justice. So what is this definition? What was the definition given by Ambedkar to the idea of social justice? So Ambedkar defined social justice as one person, one value, and every person in. So what was the definition given by Ambedkar to the idea of social justice? For Ambedkar, justice essentially means, especially with regard to Indian society, justice is associated with the concept of dignity, associated with the concept of equality, is associated with the idea, value, virtue called fraternity. Ambedkar believed that justice entails these three values: equality, fraternity, liberty, and dignity. So in whichever society there is dignity, there is justice. Dignity to every person irrespective of their birth, irrespective of their social background. So a society which accepts, which promotes, which respects the dignity of every individual, or equality of every individual, and the liberty of every individual, and a fraternity of different sections of society, is a truly just society. So Ambedkar's ultimate aim in India was to achieve this idea of social justice and to make it as the basis of a sound basis of Indian nationalism. That's the greatest contribution of B.R. Ambedkar to Indian nationalism and to Indian nation overall. So all his life, he led many struggles to achieve this aim. How to transform Indian society, which was hierarchical, which was based on the idea of inequality, which opposes the virtue of fraternity, and which negates the value of liberty. How to transform such a kind of a society in India into a society where social justice is not only possible but also plausible. Okay, where social justice is considered to be the fountainhead or the foundation of Indian nationhood. So that's the essential aim of B.R. Ambedkar. So while Ambedkar was studying in Columbia University and later London School of Economics, under the guidance of world's renowned social scientists and also political theorists and economists. So Ambedkar had come into contact with a new political ideology called modern liberalism. First of all, what is liberalism? Liberalism believes in the reconstruction of a society on the basis of the virtue called liberty. So liberalism believes individual liberty is the foremost virtue. So society has to be founded based on this idea of liberty. So enemies of liberty have to be tackled by the ideology of liberalism. So according to classical liberal political theorists in the European context, individual liberty had two enemies. Who were the enemies, or what were the enemies of individual liberty? Especially state and church. In the European context, state and church always opposed and oppressed the individual liberty. So the classical liberals, not the modern liberals, the classical liberals in the European context from the late 18th century and early 19th centuries, late 18th and early 19th centuries, so they started to limit the authority of the state and also limit the authority of the church. They started to limit the authority of the state by drafting new constitutions after certain liberal revolutions. 3 liberal revolutions were made in order to write constitutions for an absolutist state. Namely, the English Revolution, the Bloodless Revolution, American War of Independence, and also French Revolution. These were all liberal revolutions. Okay, French Revolution, it's early phase specifically. So they transformed the state from an absolute monarchy either to a constitutional monarchy or to an outright republic. So that was a transformation brought in the scope of the state by the classical liberal revolutions in England, France, and USA. Then how the oppressive authority of the church over the individual for the sake of individual liberty was made. So secularism was the idea through which the authority of the church was limited over the individual. Secularism says that state must not involve in the matters of religion, and religion must not intervene in the matters of the church, and state and church are both strictly separated. So that's how they believed individual liberty could be could be protected and could be encouraged in society. So that's the idea of classical liberalism. But at the time of Ambedkar pursuing his studies in Columbia University or London School of Economics, by the late 19th century, so the classical liberal concepts of state and church were replaced by a new political ideology called a different variant of liberalism called modern liberalism. Modern liberalism believed that state is not only an oppressive authority on the individual, negating or oppressing his individual liberty, but state can also enable individual to secure his own individual liberty and equality through political and social reforms, where society is more oppressive than the state. In such society, states can be empowered. The authority of the state can be empowered, increased, okay, by the constitutions in these respective societies to enable the social reforms, whereby liberty and equality can be sustained. So that exactly fit the case of India. In the Indian society, the state was never in a commanding position to oppress the individual rights or liberties. So in the case of India, society in general, the traditional values incorporated in the Indian society was much more oppressive towards individual liberty than the state. So this caught the attention of B.R. Ambedkar while he was studying for his postgraduate course at Columbia University in New York. So under John Dewey, so the professor whom he respected very much, under John Dewey, Ambedkar clearly understood the not only oppressive authority of the state, but also the reformist capabilities of the state. So Ambedkar was a modern liberal, and modern liberals believe in the concept of positive liberty. Positive liberty. What is the meaning of positive liberty? Positive liberty believes that just by placing in a constitution, liberties cannot exist in society. But a society has to be made capable of, society has to be reformed to such an extent that it actually respects individual liberty, justice, and fraternity. So state has to perform this transformative role where society would be reformed so that individual liberty, equality, social justice, and fraternity would be accepted, tolerated, and nurtured by the state, by the society as well. So that's the idea of positive liberty. State has to be the enabler. Classical liberalism believes that state is the oppressor. So state, authority of the state must be completely restricted by making it minimalist so that individual liberty would be prevailed. But Ambedkar understood the importance of this concept of positive liberty in his studies, whereby he understood the necessity of the state and its authority to introduce reforms in the context of Indian society, where society was the oppressive force than the state. So while coming back from his studies, while he returned from his studies, so Ambedkar had jumped into the thick of struggles. So in the mid-1920s, he had taken 3 important activities. In the mid-1920s, Ambedkar had taken 3 important activities in order to pursue his goals. First one, Ambedkar published certain journals like Mook Nayak and Bahishkrit Bharat. These journals, these periodicals were published by B.R. Ambedkar for two purposes. First one, to educate the Dalits and to empower them by witnessing, by understanding their own plight, their own suffering. So he wanted to educate the Dalit masses and give them hope and to give them ideas, education and a new value set. So for that he used these two journals to educate the Dalit masses, especially the partially educated classes or the working population among the Dalits. And the second one, he published these journals in order to educate the non-Dalits, in order to educate the rest of the Indian population of what kind of suffering was placed on the shoulders of, on the heads of these of Dalit masses because of the traditional notions of Hindu religion, Hindu society. So in order to educate the non-Dalit leaders of India, it is not a joke that even the tallest of the Indian leaders, tallest of the Indian patriots, they also did not understand the real plight and suffering of the Dalit masses in India at that time. So, educating them was also felt as a responsibility by B.R. Ambedkar, and he had fulfilled this responsibility through his two journals. So, that was first among his important activities in India. So, the second task that Ambedkar had taken was to establish educational institutions and also hostels for providing opportunities for Dalits to gain more educational employment opportunities. That's the second task that Ambedkar had undertaken. And the third task Ambedkar had undertaken was to practice certain satyagrahas. So he followed the Gandhian method of satyagraha in order to highlight the issue of Dalit oppression or discrimination. The most important of these satyagrahas was the one he had undertaken in the year 1979 called Mahad Satyagraha. So he had undertaken the idea of satyagraha to highlight the plight of suffering of the Dalits through Mahad Satyagraha. So we have to understand the importance of Mahad Satyagraha in the life and work of Ambedkar. So, briefly, I'll explain about Mahad Satyagraha. So, in the year 1926, a resolution was passed by a leader in Bombay legislature. B.R. Ambedkar had undertaken this Mahad Satyagraha in the year 1927. So, in the year 1926, a person called Bole had passed a resolution in the Bombay legislature that all the local bodies and their authorities had to throw open all their public facilities in the local areas, villages, in order to receive grants in aid or funds from the Bombay government. If they had to receive funds from the Bombay government, they had to throw open all their facilities to the people from all caste without discrimination. That's the Bole resolution that was passed in the Bombay legislature in the year 1926, and Ambedkar wanted to test the efficacy of this resolution. So in 1927, he conducted two satyagrahas. Satyagraha 1, so in the early part of 1927, and Satyagraha 2, much more important in the year December. So he just wanted to gather his supporters, mobilize his supporters at a small village called Mahad in the south of Bombay, and he wanted to go in a procession to the main water tank of the village called Chavdar tank. Why the Satyagraha was conducted? To draw water from the Chavdar tank by Ambedkar by taking his supporters in a procession. For that, a Dalit conference was conducted at that village. So, That conference was conducted. After the conference was concluded, all in a procession went to the Chavdar tank to collect water. But please understand, collecting water from the main water tank was not permitted by the upper caste villages, especially the Brahmin villages, because that was considered to be polluting the water entirely with the touch of the untouchables, Dalits. So that was opposed by the upper caste people who brought sticks and stones to stop the Dalits. And the issue immediately became a law and order problem, and the government imposed Section 144 prohibiting gathering of people more than 4 or 5 in number. So Ambedkar had to retract his steps. Ambedkar's Mahad Satyagraha was a failure. And in December month of the same year, Ambedkar again convened a Dalit conference in the Mahad village, and again he started a procession with his supporters to the Chavdar tank, and again they were opposed. So Ambedkar, in a fit of rage, Ambedkar was very angry, and he understood, he believed that the Hindu scriptures, especially the Dharma Shastras, which legalized oppression and discrimination against the Dalits, were the main problem for their plight and suffering in the present. So he burnt a copy of Hindu Dharma Shastra called Manu Smriti. On December 25th, 1927, that event happened. So Ambedkar, for the first 4 years after he returned from India, between 1923 to 1927, so he believed that he could use the method of Satyagraha to change the mind of the upper caste people, to gain certain basic and fundamental rights to the Dalit masses. Okay, at least rights like drawing water from the main village tank and allowing the Dalits to pursue education in the same educational institutions where the upper caste people would go and their children would go. But these attempts were failure. So Ambedkar in this phase was a simple reformer. Just like Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Jyotiba Phule, Vidyasagar were reformers, Ambedkar was also a reformer. Okay, he had high hopes that by using this method of Satyagraha, by appealing to the conscience of the upper caste people, he could reform them to change their attitude towards the Dalit masses, but that was a failure. So after 1928, Ambedkar understood that rights cannot be gained by simply applying to the good conscience of the upper caste. Rights can only be gained by demanding and through struggle. So Ambedkar believed, so his work lay not only in the social field as a reformer. Along being a reformer, he believed that he had to work towards the gaining of political authority by the Dalit masses. So he entered the political field, not only the social field, but also he entered the political field after the failure of the Mahad Satyagraha. So he still continued the Mahad Satyagraha with another Satyagraha. It was not started by him, but by his one of the important associates and followers of Ambedkar. In 1930, some of the important followers and associates of Ambedkar started Kalaram Temple Satyagraha. Kalaram Temple Satyagraha was started by some of the associates and followers of B.R. Ambedkar. So this Kalaram temple was in Nashik. It was a Rama temple. So what the Dalit masses were demanding? The Dalit masses were demanding that the temple gates should be open for the Dalits also, and they should be given permission. They should be allowed to worship in the temple along with the other Hindus, non-Dalit Hindus. But again, the Satyagraha was also a failure. Now it entered the courts, and the courts delayed in giving their judgment on the right of the Dalits to enter the temples, because the British government was very sensitive to get involved in the social justice movements of the Dalits. because British believed that by taking the side of the social justice movement of Ambedkar and the Dalit masses, or with Periyar, or with others in India, so they would be angering the upper caste Hindus furthermore, because upper caste Hindus were very angry against the British from the time of the from the founding of the Congress party. Different groups, first the moderates, later the extremists, later the Gandhians. So they all came from the upper caste background and they were already incensed against the British. But the British government now did not want to further make them angry by getting involved with the Dalit cause for social justice. So they remained silent. They played a very silent and neutral role. So that angered Ambedkar further, and he believed that only entering the political fray by taking their just political share and by using this political authority to establish justice for themselves was the only path left for the Dalits. So after 1928, after the failure of Mahad Satyagraha, Ambedkar entered the political field by giving his submission to the Simon Commission. By giving his submission to the Simon Commission, Ambedkar wanted political justice and the rights of the Dalits be respected and recognized. So what was his submission to the Simon Commission? Please understand, as we already know, the Simon Commission was boycotted by all stripes of Indian national leaders, from the moderates to extremists to separatists. All these topmost Indian national leaders and their cadre had successfully boycotted the Simon Commission's visit to India. But Ambedkar had seized this opportunity. So Ambedkar had submitted two things to the Simon Commission, two important things. First one, Dalits should be recognized as a separate minority community apart from the other Hindus. So Dalits should be recognized. Dalits be recognized as a separate community apart from the Hindus as a minority. As a minority, and as a minority, they should be responsible. The British were responsible to grant them separate electorate. So Dalits should be given separate electorate after recognizing them as a minority apart from the other non-Dalit Hindus in India. So this separate electorate, Ambedkar believed, would be a great enabler or a great force with which the Dalits could do justice for themselves, to create a just society in India, whereby Dalits could elect their own representatives, and these representatives, because they draw mainly votes from the Dalits only, as a part of separate electorate deal, the Dalit leaders who were elected by the Dalits they were forced to work for the justice of the Dalits alone. If they were elected by the upper caste also, non-Dalits who were in large number also, then they were not compelled or forced to do justice for the Dalits. That's the argument of Ambedkar for demanding for a separate electorate and also reservation of seats. Ambedkar demanded for separate electorate and also reservation of seats. Political power alone, a share in the political power alone, can free untouchables from the Dalits from the oppressive authority of the caste Hindus. That's the idea of Ambedkar after 1928. By continuing this struggle alone, Ambedkar, after he was invited by the British government to participate in the 3 roundtable conferences. So first roundtable conference in 1930, second roundtable conference in 1931, third roundtable conference in 1932 had successfully voiced the grievances and the real issues that Dalit faced in India. But while he was participating in the second roundtable conference, Ambedkar came into ideological conflict with Gandhiji. But before we discuss the ideological conflicts between Gandhiji and Ambedkar, we must first understand certain similarities between these two Indian giants. First one, both believed, unequivocally, without any conditions, that India should be a free nation. There was not an iota of doubt in the minds of these two persons that India should be a free nation as soon as possible. There is no substitute for independence. And these two great personalities also understood that. So an independent India without social justice, or without the concept of equality, without political power shared to all the communities in India is just not worth fighting for. So they both believed in the idea of social justice. And they both believed that India can only remain as a single country, only as long as plurality and diversity in India is sustained. Only as long as plurality and diversity in India is sustained, only thus far India can remain as a single country. And to sustain this plurality and diversity in India, democracy, what we can always call a radical democracy, only a radical democracy, with universal adult franchise is the only form of political system that is suitable for India to sustain India's plurality and enormous diversity. So these are the ultimate aims of both Ambedkar and Gandhiji. So over the aims, they almost have no or very little differences. But the differences lay in the first understanding, their own respective understanding of the Indian society. There were enormous differences. And also the methods that one should follow in order to achieve these aims were also different for both the great personalities. So in the manner of analysis and understanding of the Indian society, and also the methods to be pursued to achieve the goals. In these two manners, both Ambedkar and Gandhiji were bound to follow their own different paths to achieve their respective goals, which were mostly common. So let us first understand the most important issue of the differences between Gandhiji's and Ambedkar's ideological conflict. This ideological conflict is tend to arise mainly because of their background, mainly because of their uprising, mainly because of their experiences they have gained in their own respective lives, and also mainly because of their study, analysis and understanding of the Indian societies and the ills and the methods of reform. So Ambedkar believed that the evil of untouchability is essentially a Hindu problem. So it should be tackled within the folds of Hindu religion by the upper caste Hindus who committed the evil. So Gandhiji believed that Satyagraha method, or the self-purificatory service provided by the upper caste people for the service of the Dalits, should be the ideal method to solve this problem of untouchability and to end this evil system of untouchability. So that's Gandhiji's understanding and modus operandi. But as far as Ambedkar is concerned, Ambedkar, as I already explained previously, that rights can never be gifted by one community to another community, but rights can only be gained through prolonged struggle. So Ambedkar believed that if rights, especially the right to equality, liberty or others, were gifted by the upper caste to the Dalits, then it would lead to paternalism. It would lead to forever weakening of the Dalit community. So Ambedkar did not want that. Ambedkar wanted Dalits to get educated. Ambedkar wanted the Dalits to get united and to fight for their own rights without any support, without expecting any struggle, without expecting any service or help from the outside. Because Ambedkar had a very keen sense of history. He believed that, he clearly understood that in the history of India, so many reformers have come and so many reformers have gone, and these reformers were sidelined, marginalized, and they were ignored, or some reformers were deified. They were made into gods, just like Kabir. But their essential message was conveniently forgotten or ignored by the upper caste Hindu community. So that was the fate of Indian reformers according to Ambedkar. So Ambedkar was very hesitant to take any help from outside. He wanted the Dalit community to stand on its own feet and to fight for their own just rights. That's the essential difference between Gandhiji's understanding of the problem and solution to untouchability, and also Ambedkar's understanding of the problem and solution to the evil of untouchability. And the next one, Gandhiji believed that the system of caste should not be blamed for the evil of untouchability. Gandhiji believed that caste had started as a system of functional categorization of society to fulfill certain needs of the time when it was founded in the early part of CE, when caste was rigidified, it certainly had fulfilled certain functions. But Ambedkar believed that caste is the root cause for untouchability. He believed that as long as caste remains, there would be outcast. So in order to end the system of untouchability, which is very evil in its very nature, so the system of caste should also be opposed. So that's why Ambedkar was a prolific writer. But one of the important books written by Ambedkar was Annihilation of Caste. So he wanted, as the title of his own book suggests, that he wanted a complete annihilation of caste itself, not a reformation of caste. Gandhi wanted the caste to remain, but to be reformed. Gandhi wanted the caste to remain because caste provided a certain kind of unity and a certain kind of stability to Hindu society. But Ambedkar believed that such a kind of unity and security or stability of the Hindu society were perverse in its very nature. So Ambedkar wanted a complete annihilation of caste, but Gandhi wanted the caste to be reformed because at its very birth it was a noble institution in its origins. And Gandhiji was a skeptic of the authority of the state. Gandhi was in his political ideas an anarchist. He was a great skeptic. So he was doubtful about the authority of the state and its noble intentions or its use in order to pursue the cause of social reforms. But Ambedkar believed, as I already suggested in the previous concepts, that Ambedkar believed in the idea of modern liberalism. Modern liberalism believes in the idea of the reformist nature of the state. State has to provide certain prerequisites so that justice can prevail in society. So that's also another difference between Gandhiji and Ambedkar. And Gandhiji, to a certain extent, glorified Indian society and especially the village community. But for Ambedkar, the Hindu society and village community in particular was a den of ignorance. It was based on a den of ignorance. So Ambedkar believed that the plight of the Dalit masses and their suffering and discrimination could only end if they get urbanized, if they find employment and educational opportunities in the urban areas. Because in the urban areas, it is very difficult to discriminate against another person, okay, comparatively. So, Gandhiji believed that Hindu scripture should not be blamed for the perversity, for the social perversity of the untouchability, the system of untouchability. But Ambedkar laid blame entirely on the Hindu scriptures, especially the Manu Dharma Shastra, which actually established and encouraged and mandated the participation of the upper caste Hindus in the evil system of untouchability. So that's the reason why Ambedkar had burnt a copy symbolically of Manu Dharma Shastra at the time of Mahat Satyagraha in 1927. So in these views, Gandhi and Ambedkar were entirely different in their outlook and also in their modus operandi and in their understanding of the Indian society. But as I already explained, their aims were the same. They wanted to achieve democracy, independence, social justice and equality for all people in India, but they followed different methods. These different methods were necessitated because the caste system in India or untouchability, the evil of untouchability is a very complex issue. So it necessitated different outlooks, different approaches and different modus operandi. So as the problem grows more complex, the solutions that one must offer to tackle the problem should also be more comprehensive. So these two outlooks were very essential. But please understand, Gandhi had learned so many things from Ambedkar and Ambedkar had also learned so many things from Gandhiji. So we will come to that later. But another important thing that happened in the life of Ambedkar was the Yola conference, where he attended. Yola conference of Dalits was organized in 1935 in Maharashtra, and Ambedkar for the first time announced that he was born a Hindu but he would not die a Hindu. So it was a result of Ambedkar's pessimism about the capability of Hindu society to be reformed, because Mahat Satyagraha was a failure where Dalits just demanded the right to entry into the Hindu temple at Kalaram Satyagraha in 1930, and previously in 1927 at the Mahat Satyagraha, Dalits simply demanded the right to take water from the main village tank. Even these basic minimum rights, forget about the economic rights, forget about the reparations. Dalits were not demanding any reparations from the upper caste Hindu community for the injustice committed against them for centuries and even for millennia. They were not demanding this. They were only demanding for rights in the present, and even those were minimalist, but these minimum rights were also negated, opposed, and they were forgotten by the upper caste Hindu community. That's the cause for Ambedkar's pessimism in 1935, whereby he announced that he would convert to another faith, which would accept Dalits as free and equal human beings. So Ambedkar was also, from this particular phase of his life, was also a keen student of comparative religions. So he studied Hinduism in order to understand the genesis, causes and the problems in Hindu community that practiced untouchability. So Ambedkar was a keen student of Hindu religion, Hindu scriptures, etc. But also he was a very keen student of Buddhism from this particular period of time. So Ambedkar also studied Sikhism, Islam, Christianity as well. So in 1936, Ambedkar was invited by a social reform organization in Punjab called Jat Paat Todak Mandal. Jat Paat Todak Mandal had a social reformist organization in Punjab, had invited Ambedkar to give a presidential speech at their annual conference. And Ambedkar prepared a speech, and he sent the speech to the management of the conference and the social reformist organization, but they were shocked after reading the speech because Ambedkar had dealt with certain issues which were vital in order to address the issue of untouchability. First one, Ambedkar has already explained, laid the blame for the perpetuation of untouchability on the Hindu scriptures and Hindu religion in general. So he wanted only two things: either the Hindu religious leaders and Hindu people in general had to reform their own religious scriptures which mandated the practice of untouchability, like Manu Dharma Shastra, or to change their epics where even the gods would discriminate against the Dalits. Either the Hindu religious leaders and upper caste people had to reform their religious scriptures, or they should expect the Dalits to convert to a faith, okay, which would accept them as equal human beings. So that was also announced by Ambedkar again in the speech he was about to deliver at the annual conference of the Jat Paat Todak Mandal in Punjab. And again, Ambedkar had very clearly explained the system of caste and its very crooked nature in this speech. Ambedkar explained the system of caste as a building with stairs without any stairwell. This stairwell was completely missing in the Hindu society. So the Hindu society had completely compartmentalized their people into very isolated groups of communities. So Hindu society, he explained, is like a multi-storied building with a stairwell missing. So people who are born in a particular story have to remain in that particular level permanently without any crime of their own. So there is no social mobility in Hindu society. So where society lacks social mobility, it essentially lacks justice according to Ambedkar. Because according to Ambedkar, fame, glory, prestige and status must be based not on the cause, not on the birth, but on the contribution of every member towards society and the overall common good. So irrespective of their social contribution, irrespective of their overall common good, if a person is condemned to the positions of lower strata, if a person is given a privileged position just on the basis of mere birth, then that system was very, very cruel in its very nature according to Ambedkar. So that's another analysis of Ambedkar in the annihilation of caste. And another analysis of Ambedkar in the book, in his speech that was intended to be given but later published as a book titled Annihilation of Caste, was also that Hindu scriptures, they had mandated their people to practice untouchability. So it was a logical outcome of the scriptures or the scriptural doctrines. So it was not an aberration as Gandhiji had claimed. So scriptures have mandated noble values according to Gandhi, but the society perversed these noble values. But Ambedkar opposed this idea of Gandhiji, and he analyzed that Hindu scriptures were to be blamed for the cause of this. So that's the reason why there was no Voltaire in India. So Ambedkar says that there were only Erasmus. There were many Erasmus. So Erasmus was a Catholic reformer in the late 15th and early 16th century who wanted to reform the many corrupt practices of the Catholic Church. So there were many Erasmus in Indian society, Hindu society, according to Ambedkar, but there were no Voltaires. So Voltaire was the one who completely okay, transformed European society through his ideas of enlightenment. He was the mortal opponent of Catholic Church and its dogmas and doctrines, which perpetuated ignorance, corruption, and oppression. So there were no Voltaires in India, only Erasmus. There was not even a Martin Luther who founded an alternative church, a new church in Europe, opposing the Catholic Church and its oppression. So there were only Erasmus who would tried to reform here and there, just like Ramanujacharya, just like Nanak, just like Kabir. There were great reformers. These were great people, but there were no great people who sorted this problem, who condemned this problem outright from its very roots. That's the anguish of Ambedkar. He expressed in the book Annihilation of Caste. There were many things, but these were very important. So after 1930s, after the end of 1930s, Ambedkar joined Viceroy's Executive Council, for which he was blamed as anti-national by all the political leaders in India and their cadre many times. Even now, Ambedkar is looked in a negative manner by the so-called nationalist or hyper-nationalist or ultra-nationalist. But Ambedkar, even when he was a part of the Viceroy's Executive Council, had always worked for the emancipation of the Dalits and for the rights of the Dalit masses in India. The only issue that was close to his heart and the only issue that he believed would give a true meaning to the idea of Indian nationalism. So, at the end of the British rule in India, so Ambedkar was elected to the Constituent Assembly, but later his seat was lost after partition to East Pakistan. But later Congress and Gandhiji was magnanimous enough to give a seat from their own quota to Ambedkar, when he was elected not only to the drafting committee but was also made the chairman of the drafting committee, the most important decision taken in the history of India, because so far all the legal codes, all the constitutions were always written by the Brahmins, okay, and they mandated the Dalits what should be the ideal form of the state, what should be the ideal form of society, and what should be the ideal form of social relations and interactions. But for the first time in the millennia old Indian history, a Dalit was given an opportunity to enshrine the ideals of the new Indian nation and a new Indian society. So what should be the ideal form of political system in India? That should provide fraternity, equality, justice, and liberty. And what should be the ideal form of social interactions in India? What should be the ideal form of human relations in India? So these were all mandated now by a great Indian called Ambedkar, the only Dalit leader to mandate such things to the overall Hindu society. That's a turning point in Indian history. So, at the end of our present lecture on Ambedkar, I just want to highlight only one great speech, that Ambedkar gave many great speeches, but I just wanted to highlight this one. At the end of the constitution making process, just one day before the adoption of the Indian Constitution on November 26th, 1949, Ambedkar gave this speech titled Grammar of Anarchy. In this speech, Ambedkar gave warnings to the future Indians like us about the things we must be very careful about if we want a stable constitution and social justice in India. So, in this speech, Ambedkar gave three warnings. The first warning that Ambedkar gave to the Indian people was that after the promulgation of the Indian Constitution, Indians should refrain from practicing two different methods to solve their problems. So Ambedkar asked the future Indian generations to refrain from practicing either the method of satyagraha or revolutionary methods. Indians should not practice either satyagraha or revolutionary methods to solve their problems in future. So Ambedkar called upon the future Indian generations to stick to only the constitutional methods. Future Indian generations must stick to, they must hold fast to the constitutional methods only. Because these methods become redundant, useless. Because at the time of British rule, because British rule was not democratic enough, because the British did not allow civil liberties, because the British did not even allow the highlighting of the issues that were troubling the Indian society through democratic, peaceful, non-violent ways. So either revolutionary methods or satyagraha methods were essential. There was no other way. But constitutional allowed all possible, plausible, legal constitutional methods that could be pursued by the Indians in future. So our Indian nation would only sustained, would only be continued, would only be kept, okay, if we follow constitutional methods only with patience, okay, with political education. And Ambedkar used this term constitutional morality. Constitutional morality is to put before the interest of the nation, before the interest of our parties, ideologies, persons, or our own individual selves. To put the interest of the nation before everything else. So we should consider ourselves to be Indians and Indians alone. So that's how we have to cherish our own national ideals. Through constitutional morality. That was the first warning given by Ambedkar. If we again come back to follow the satyagraha methods or revolutionary methods of terrorism, then Indian nation could not be sustained. There is a great threat, grave danger to the Indian nation future. That's the first warning given by Ambedkar. The second warning given by Ambedkar was that bhakti or hero worship is a sure road to dictatorship. Bhakti or hero worship is very, very dangerous. Bhakti in religion is okay. It can give a person moksha. It can give a person some mental peace. But bhakti in politics would make the people believe that their leaders were not leaders alone but messiahs who came to emancipate them. So they would forget about their own innate capabilities. They would forget that in a democratic system, people are the real rulers and the rulers are mere servants. So in a democratic system, this is a norm. This norm would be forgotten by the people if they start practicing bhakti worship. Their leaders, if they were considered to be messiahs or gods or incarnations, then Indian democracy could never be sustained and it could never be protected, and dictatorship would again be established in India, just like before. So that's why bhakti worship should never be practiced, because that was against the self-respect of the people, independent people of India. And the third warning that Ambedkar gave to the future Indian generations was, mere political democracy is not enough. Political democracy is not enough. In addition to political democracy, we must strive, we must use this political democracy to establish social democracy as soon as possible. Political democracy simply means one person, one vote, one value. So every person has a single vote and every single vote has only single value, one value. But the real essence of a democracy, not only in its political manifestation, but it can be found in its social manifestations. That means every person in India, irrespective of their race, color, caste, language, religion, gender, they must be treated with equal dignity. They must be having the same status in society, and there must be social mobility in India. Equal dignity and social mobility is essential for justice to be established in Indian society. Without this social democracy and its social justice, mere political democracy cannot sustain this large country like India. If the ordinary masses lack social democracy and social justice, they would not be content with the political democracy alone. They would overthrow the structure, they would blow the structure up, and they would re-establish another repressive, oppressive or dictatorial system. So that's why these three were the most important warnings given by Ambedkar in the last speech that he gave to the Constituent Assembly on 25th of November 1949, called Grammar of Anarchy speech. And he was always fascinated by Buddhism in India. Even in the Constituent Assembly, when so many members of the Constituent Assembly criticized the draft constitution for being overly westernized, Ambedkar repeatedly explained to them that the ideas of liberty, the ideas of equality, the idea of democracy, justice are not the monopoly of Western political systems alone. They are the universal values. Even the Indian people need justice. Even the Indian people are the other people of Asian countries which were at that time recently made independent should seek justice as a noble human values. These are universal human values. These are not just Western values or traditional Indian values. So Ambedkar explained that all these values were enshrined in the Buddhist Sangha thousands of years ago. And Ambedkar told these members who criticized the draft constitution in so many various ways that Buddha was his ideal, not Voltaire or the French Revolution. He had drawn these ideas and values and virtues of liberty, equality, fraternity, justice and freedom, not from the French Revolution, not from Western philosophers like Voltaire or John Locke or others, but he had incorporated these values from the great Buddha and the Buddhist Sangha, okay, which was founded and which later worked on the democratic foundations. So, through his work, Ambedkar gave a new and noble and a very enlightened meaning to the idea of Indian nationalism. Through his work, Ambedkar used the concept of justice in order to criticize and in order to make us understand what is essential and what is not so essential, what is virtuous and what is not virtuous in our traditions, in our scriptures. Not everything that we inherit in our tradition or religious scriptures is worth preserving. So we have to apply the idea of justice according to Ambedkar in order to understand for ourselves by applying our own rational agency to understand what is worth pursuing, what is worth protecting, and what is worth shedding, and what should be completely left out of the traditional values and norms. So justice is the beacon. It is a beacon light that should be used by every Indian in order to further. So the social reformation did not start with Ambedkar, and it should not be ended with Ambedkar. So social reform should further continue as long as marginalization, as long as oppression, as long as exploitation, as long as discrimination on the basis of birth would continue. Ambedkar's ideals and Ambedkar's determination to reconstitute Indian society on the basis of justice, liberty, freedom, democracy and equality must further continue, and that is the only commemoration, and that is the only thanks, and that is the only form of thanks that we can give to Ambedkar. So thank you very much, and to all of you, greetings from Sarat Chandra IAS Academy on the occasion of Ambedkar's birth anniversary. Thank you very much.